Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion. You can comment on the live stream, and we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, we are live, and I forgot to put us back in the studio after the intro video played, so that's a great little start to the show. I got so distracted by my own intro video. I was like,
it was good.
It's
a good video.
It's like, why is the screen dark? I love it when I get to chat with a fellow Canadian all the way from Montreal. Are you bilingual or trilingual or quadrilingual?
Trilingual. And it was funny, John, because you were doing the intro and I was watching it too, and I was like, wow, these are amazing stories. I wonder who's gonna bring on next. And I was like, oh wait, that's me.
Yeah. So English, French, and third language would be Tamil.
You got it. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. So you're a master speaker. And in fact, you run a program called MasterTalk, and you're now, I say you're an internationally recognized speaker. Hopefully I've got that right. And you've even trademarked MasterTalk. So you're at a really cool place. But I'm interested in kind of how you got there, because people will see now this really confident, polished speaker, creating YouTube videos. You got following 20-odd thousand followers on YouTube and an internationally recognized company and program. But I didn't start out like that. So I'd like to know a bit of the backstory and how you got to this place.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Happy to go into it. So the story begins at birth. I was born and raised in a city called Montreal, as you very well know, in Canada. Yeah. And to your point, and the reason why Jonathan's asking that question for everyone who's listening, is because Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak English and French to be successful in the city. So when I was 5 years old, Jonathan, my parents looked up to me and they said, well, buddy, I mean, you're great at English, but you need to know how to speak French.
So did they put you into a French immersion school, or?
That's exactly what happened. So how Quebec works is there's a law called Law 101 or Loi 101 in French. As you can see, I learned the language.
Yeah. Impeccable pronunciation.
Yeah. So what they do to protect the French language, which by the way is a law I love. And super I'm grateful for it today, is if your parents did not go to English school, and you're the parents of immigrants, which my parents were, they immigrated from Sri Lanka in the early 90s, I have to go to French school. So it's not really a choice. But my parents also wanted me to study French because they wanted me to learn the language. But the challenge was, my whole life, not only did I struggle with communication, I presented in a language I didn't know.
Right. Yeah, you're trying to present in French. So, like your parents, did they speak Tamil at home, or the mixture of Tamil and English? Or is Tamil, would you call it your first language then?
Technically, Tamil is my mother tongue. Because you said that, it's interesting, John, is like my dad would always tell my mother never to speak to me in English. And the reason is because he didn't want me to catch my parents' accent.
Okay, like their English accent, right? So they wanted you to have like a native English speaking accent.
Correct.
So, right. Well, I mean, children's brains are amazing. I have a 13-month-old, and I'm like, shoot, man, I should have really studied more. I've learned to speak 4 other languages, but none of them I'm fluent enough to like communicate with him in. So I'm like, kid, at least he's gonna get English and Australian. Like, my wife is from Australia, so I'm like, at least hopefully you'll have at least a bit of an Australian accent growing up. So, did you start learning? So when did you start learning English then as a language? Was it when you started going to preschool or something like that? Like, or how'd that start?
Yeah, absolutely, brother. So nobody asked me this. I love this. So when I was 2, how I learned English. So you're right. It wasn't from my parents. A bit of my dad, but not really my mom. Mm-hmm. My parents sent me to an English daycare when I was 2 years old.
Okay.
That's how I learned English. But when I got to preschool, that was all French.
Right. So would you say that, do you feel like your French is more fluent than your English? Or, I mean, because your English sounds impeccable, by the way. I'm not picking up a trace of any kind of any French accent, which is almost slightly disappointing, really. But then again, I would expect as like a professional speaker, you probably learn the subtleties of linguistics. So,
Absolutely. It took a lot of work. Actually, my first language is technically Tamil, I guess, but
hmm
outside of Tamil, it's English and then French. So even if I studied my whole life in French, I actually practiced my English more because I never really liked French because I
okay,
was so bad at it. I
right.
struggle with it. It's so much harder than English. So what I did when I was growing up as a kid is I would find like 3%, 5% of the school, everyone else only spoke French, but there's 3 to 5% of people who spoke English. So I became friends with those people, and a lot of those people are most of my lifelong friends, people I've known
Yeah,
since
yeah.
like the age of 10. So we were
That's
like
amazing.
rebels in the
Right.
French school.
That's amazing. I wish I'd paid better attention. Like my brother speaks four languages, and like he lives in Turkey, so he speaks English, French, Turkish, and Romanian. And I was like, dang, I should have like paid closer attention because like when it comes to travel, like linguistics are really really valuable. Being able to speak other languages, but there's also a really cool part of it when it comes to brain development. You have like a more flexible, open, malleable brain when you're exposed to different languages. Because I imagine. It's funny because I'm nerding out on language stuff because I really love it, and there's a really cool connection between linguistics and music. But like the Tamil language, I imagine has a different structure. So in English, let's go to the English lesson here, subject, object, verb kind of thing. There's a specific sort of sentence structure. In a language like Polish, which I learned to speak, there isn't that. So they have a whole different system where the order of the words doesn't really matter. So for my English brain, trying to hear a sentence in Polish was really weird because it could be like ball through the eye, which sounds like, but anyways, because the way that their language is structured, it's the ending of the word that dictates its meaning. So trying to wrap my head around that when I was like 20, 29 years old and living in Poland, I was like, this is right out there. This is weird. But I still wanted to learn how to speak the language, but it's incredibly difficult. So I'm kind of curious then, like the crossover, if there, I mean, I don't know if there's any crossover at all between like Tamil and English, for example, or if they're just so different that like there's no correlation there.
Yeah, so definitely between English and French, what I learned later is there's actually a lot of correlation because the root language is still Latin at the end of the
hmm
day. So I was able to kind of figure it out. Tamil though, I
Yeah.
have no clue. Like I can't read Tamil.
Okay.
I can't but I can speak it. But
Yeah.
the only reason I can speak it, John,
Yeah.
is because I watched a bunch of Bollywood movies. That's
Okay.
the only reason. And my mom only talks to me in Tamil. So I
Right. Right.
that's how
Right.
I learned the language. But I never learned it like from let's use a word for this, from a structured perspective. Like I
right. Right.
never went to Tamil class. My mom tried that on me when I was a kid and I was like, "No way. I'm not doing this Tamil." But I learned it organically
Yeah. Yeah.
because I wanted to I didn't want to talk to my mom in English because she just it just doesn't work for her. It just she's
Right.
not able to communicate properly. So that's why
Right.
I learned the language. But yeah, I
Yeah.
would have no idea. But it's very different, I think.
Yeah. Like just trying to communicate. I remember getting so frustrated. I go back to the Polish one because that one sticks out of my head. I was trying to buy bus tickets, and it should have been such a simple phrase, but because there's like three different genders as well as like seven different sort of types of endings, they call them noun cases in the language. I couldn't get it right, and the lady behind the counter was just like merciless, brutal, cold, like Eastern European, just staring with like no trace of compassion towards me. It was like, I don't understand. Nie rozumiem. I don't understand. And I'm like, I'm literally, and I pulled up my phrase book and I'm like, I'm literally pronouncing it exactly the way that I see it. But so just this idea of trying to convey something in a language that isn't really your mother tongue, you can't really sort of convey the emotion, the feeling. And so I think it's beautiful that like you communicate with your mom in that way because uh, you know she can then communicate all of the emotion and exactly how she wants to speak it. And so and I'm really glad that you're able to maintain that because I imagine like maybe outside of your mom, I don't know if you have other family members you communicate with, but do you get much exposure to Tamil as a language?
I do. I do. That's a great question. So I would say anyone who's above my generation, I'm speaking to in Tamil primarily. So my
Okay.
uncles, my aunts, because they're all the same situation as my mom. They all immigrated from Sri Lanka to Canada. But
Right.
anyone who's my age, like my generation,
Yeah.
zero Tamil. I'm only speaking to them in English. Yeah.
So even if like cousins and whatnot, it's
Man, you're asking some good questions. There are some exceptions, but it's not a lot. Like, I'll give you an example. So
Okay.
my mom had seven siblings, and my dad had like 7 or 8. I don't even know the
Okay.
exact number. Okay, that's how
A
many.
lot. A lot of aunts and
So
uncles.
so many of them, absolutely. So many of them moved to Canada. Most of them did, but some of them moved to Europe. So
Mm.
there's some cousins that don't know English. So they
Right.
know
Let's say they
like
moved to like Germany or
correct.
yeah.
So they know like Dutch and Tamil. So for
Okay.
like, and it's like very small though. We're talking like, I mean, probably less than 10%. I'm only thinking of one cousin right now
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
my age and my family. I can't even think of any other that outside of the people in Sri Lanka that I haven't seen in like 10, 15 years.
Mm.
Like there's that one cousin that we have to speak to him in Tamil because he doesn't understand English and he doesn't understand French either. So some of them speak French and Tamil. So those people I can just talk to in French. But
Right.
the
Right.
the Dutch one is challenging. So that one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because English is kind of a mutt language. So it was first the actually the Dutch had an influence on it. Germanic had an influence on it, and there was the old sort of Gaelic and Celtic languages. And then when the French conquered, England, they came in and tried to impose French. And English just sucked at learning languages. So what we have is we have French words in the English language, and that's why we can find some degree of crossover between French and English, is because they got some French words into it, but the English just were terrible at learning other languages. So then for your parents, so here's one thing that always like puzzles, not puzzles me. I mean, I understand coming to Canada is like kind of a land of opportunity, but like my wife comes from Australia. It's really hot, warm, country that doesn't know what winter is, and then she comes to like Alberta, Canada, which gets like 8 months of winter a year. And just recently, okay, we had 21 degrees, and then like not even a week later, we're like minus 12 in April.
Mm.
You know, how did your parents find learn like now like being exposed to weather like this, and just like that in itself has to be like I have just like so much respect for immigrants coming to a country like this, because there's so many aspects of it. They're incredibly challenging. It really speaks to just a strength of character they must possess.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. So to give you the context there, so when my mom got married,
Mm,
she took a flight to Canada and she was 30, and that was the first ever flight she ever took in her life.
wow.
So she never like exited the country. She was like she wasn't in a winter jacket. She doesn't know what that is. She's like in a
Right.
traditional, it's called a sari. And she
Yeah.
gets off the plane. She doesn't know English, doesn't know French, just knows Tamil.
Yeah.
It's like 1990 like 4 or something or
there's no
1995.
there's no internet, or not commonly in usage. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing. So she's 30. So it's her first flight, and she looks outside and there's snow, and she doesn't understand what that is.
Wow.
She's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"What's happening?" And she's like freezing outside.
No kidding.
So yeah, they had to adapt. And by the way, they're still adapting even 25 years. Even
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
like, it's like even today, actually, weirdly enough, today's April 19th for those
Yeah.
who are listening to the recording, and it was snowing outside this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, we took out the tempo like yesterday, and people don't even know what a tempo. It's like this thing that you do to
Yeah.
protect the snow from your car. For those.
Yeah. 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 Well, I remember I had a roommate from Singapore one year at university, and it was probably like 15, 16 degrees out. For us, they're like, man, that's t-shirt weather. This is great. And he was wearing this like winter jacket. I'm like, are you nuts? But like a place like Singapore, it's like 32 degrees year round. The only difference is sometimes it's humid, sometimes it's dry. That's it. But he wasn't used to even something like 10 or 15 degrees where it felt cold. So then I'm kind of curious. Now I'm curious about your parents' experience, because I've been a traveler and I've been a foreigner in other countries, and I know that's really opened my mind to some of the challenges that people experience when they face this. Um, you know, did she feel like Canada was kind of like a warm and welcoming place? I mean, because the Quebecois in particular, like you land in Montreal, and the Quebecois kind of have a bit of a reputation for being a little bit closed off and protective of their culture. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
wondering how she was received and how she found that.
You know, it's fascinating. Having lived in Montreal my whole life, it's true. Quebecers do get a rep for that, but
Yeah.
honestly, it was never a complaint that my mom brought up, and I think I know why. I think it's because we lived in Montreal.
Right, which is really very cosmopolitan and diverse. And
Yeah, if it was like even Quebec City is not bad at all.
yeah,
I think it's more like Gaspé, where it's like,
right.
but today I wouldn't say that for 2022
Sure,
Gaspé.
sure, of course.
Like maybe 1994, like the regions like Saguenay, like you have no idea what I'm talking about right now. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
there's
These
like
regions of the Quebec,
like what is
because
this like Richard Branson Necker Island? Like what's going on?
yeah,
What is this? So yeah, I never. It was never complained. It's actually been pretty good. Like a lot of the Quebecers. The only people who maybe were annoying were like the school teachers, but like outside of the school teachers, the people, the general public in Montreal,
yeah,
oh, they're super nice, and they also
yeah.
loved us because I spoke French, right? So it wasn't
Right,
like
right, right. So did
yeah.
you did you end up like as a child or even as a teenager kind of sometimes being translator for your parents?
Oh, all the time, even today, even
Right.
today.
So you
Yeah,
end up
yeah.
being a bit of a go between, and which I mean is of course I love this because I love brain development, and I think this is so good. It's like such a good brain exercise for you to go back and forth. Plus, I mean, my wife, we now have like a 1 year old, and I have such respect for motherhood and mothers now that I'm witnessing it in real time take place. So I just think like you having the opportunity to kind of give back and kind of serve your mom in that way and help her like is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And life is, I think, now that you mention it, I didn't really think of it that much myself, but you're probably right. I probably started translating for my mom when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And I still do that today, but it's easier because we live together. So it's not like that big a
Right,
deal
right, right.
anyway.
And so, does she have some grasp of the English or the French language, or is she? Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's just easier to I mean I get it. Like when I lived in another country, I was like the moment we bumped into an English speaker, we're like, oh hey, I want to talk to you just because I want my brain to not have to think about the words I'm producing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, so speaking of like talking about words and producing and all this kind of stuff, so we now know now that you are a professional speaker, but you weren't always like this. But I wonder if some of these experiences kind of shaped how you've become this, because maybe from an early age, you're almost being, I don't say being put on a stage or being put on display, but you're being put in this relatively prominent position where you have to communicate even as a young child. Is that what drew you to like wanting to be some kind of professional speaker or?
Definitely, brother. So essentially what happened, Jonathan, was as I was getting older and I was doing these, presentations in French, and I still wasn't that comfortable at presentations, even by the time I was 16, 17 years old. But basically, what happened was when I got to university, I started doing these things called case competitions. Think
Okay.
of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing like rugby or football or some other sport,
Maybe
I
some
was,
hockey in Quebec.
yeah, maybe some hockey.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little hockey, a little ice hockey there. I was
Yeah.
doing the presentation version of that. And that's how I
Okay.
learned how to speak. And it was that skill set that gave me the idea for the YouTube channel because I realized that everything I knew about communication wasn't available for free on the internet. But that's why I
Hmm.
started posting because I thought back to the kid I was a long time
Yeah.
ago and I was like, shit, there's like a lot of people struggle with this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think it is that people are so terrified of public speaking? Because there's there's the saying, or I don't know if this is backed up statistically, but the people are more afraid of public speaking than death, and I'm not quite sure if that's entirely accurate. But I mean, I think it's a pretty accurate representation of how people generally feel about being put in the spotlight and being asked to speak about something. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely, brother. So, I've been asked this question a lot. The first couple of times I got asked it, I had no idea. I was kind of just sitting there and like, I'm not really sure. But now that I've given it some thought, I think I have a pretty good explanation as to why we're scared of communication. So let's think about this for a second. Where did we first learn the skill? Because that's probably where we learned the habit of doing something. Like for example, your weight loss story. Like
Mm,
when you were younger, you learned a habit that just stuck for a longer period of time. You had to break that habit to be successful,
yeah.
right? So or multitude of different factors.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
so same thing with communication. Most of us learn communication in school, right? High school, elementary school, etc.
Mm,
And in that environment, there's three key problems. Whether you're born in Canada like us, whether you're in the US, whether you're somewhere else. Number one is all of those presentations are mandatory. We don't
right.
wake up one morning saying, hey, Jonathan, you want to wake up in the morning, get some breakfast, and present all day?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't start with that. No.
Absolutely, right? We don't. It's not something we look forward to. Second problem is every presentation is different. So when you're in
Mm.
school or at work, you're not just doing one presentation. You're doing presentations in English, French, sciences, history, gym. You got
Right.
a gym presentation too. It's like, and you're doing all of these presentations at the same time.
And then it's happening at like it's really awkward stage in life where you're going through a developmental stage and a sort of a discovery stage where you don't even feel anchored to yourself because your body is changing, all this stuff going on. And then you're like, now I have to go up in front of people and be judged for my presentation of this information when I already want to kind of shrink out of the limelight feeling incredibly awkward. And that really sort of gets implanted in your brain and you go, I hate like speaking in front of people because it triggers the feeling that they would have felt, awkward in that position. I remember the first time I gave a presentation, I used to run a nutrition and supplement store, and this is going back to like 2015. And I'd never really done much in the way of public speaking or presentation. I'd done some teaching, I guess, but teaching felt different to me because it wasn't that I wasn't necessarily presenting a specific topic to be judged on. It was like I was just presenting material I was really familiar and comfortable with. But now I was going to give this presentation, and it was, I had an audience here who had paid to be a part of this event, so I was now getting paid to do the speaking. Somehow that shifted it in my head that like uh, uh, there's this weight of expectation I put on my shoulders, and so I just like smashed my presentation in like 5 minutes instead of like just like hammered through it. And I was like, okay, well, cool. Now that I'm done, we can get the next guy up here, kind of thing. And the guy in the audience was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, man, you shared some interesting stuff. I want to ask you some questions if you don't mind. And actually, it was when we started doing that it started feeling a lot more natural. I was like, okay, now I feel comfortable because this feels more conversational. And so it's interesting to this day. Like I do presentations for like Johns Hopkins University and a few other like sort of bigger institutions, Kaiser Permanente and whatnot. Which I mean, it boggles my mind sometimes. I think about it, I'm like, cool. Like I'm getting in front of these large companies and giving presentations now, and I don't even think twice about it. But my favorite part always is when we get to the Q&A, when we get to the interactive portion, when we're asking questions and conversing back and forth. So much more so than just presenting information.
Mm. I love that. I love the conversational aspect of that because it makes you more comfortable, right, when you're
Mm.
sharing an idea. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it feels very natural. So you know, you kind of nerded out on what presentation competitions, like would you call it, or you know, what drew you to it? What made you go like, this is what I want to do with my life? What thrill did you get out of it?
It's funny. It's very anticlimactic. The reason I did these case competition was to get a job. So, you're like thinking I'm on this destiny, and
Yeah.
the truth is, Jonathan,
That's really practical though.
yeah, case competitions is like the reason people do them, and just to give some context as well, because I'm sure you're curious. Basically, the reason these exist is students are given a business problem. So, for example, University of Alberta is a big case competition. Canada's actually huge in these case comps, just nobody knows
I've
what
never
it
even
is.
heard of these until we
Yeah,
started talking. I
it's a
didn't know
very
this existed.
subculture.
Yeah.
So there's this competition in the West where you're from called JDC West. It stands for
Okay.
the Commerce Games, and it's for all of like the UBC, U of A, Capilano, like all of those schools, like all meet up. University of Calgary. So, anyways, it's this whole thing, but basically, the reason students do this is because companies sponsor these competitions.
Okay.
So big companies like Scotiabank, that people have no idea what it is, like RBC, these are like big Canadian banks, those who don't know.
Yeah.
They come to these their executives come and they watch the students.
Okay.
And whoever's really good, they go, "Hey, do you want to like come work here? Do you want an internship? Do you want an interview?" So that's why I started doing them. I just grew obsessed with them later on.
Right. So is this idea? This is a path to. So that presents kind of an interesting question, just like maybe culturally speaking. Um, did your parents, because we often find this again with the sort of immigrant culture where parents really value education because when you come from a country like a first world country like Canada, just about everybody, even sort of lower class people who we have a really high standard of living. It's hard to fathom that there's still countries in the world where there are poor people and illiterate people where education is like the bridge between a life of poverty. I mean, in India, it is a really interesting sort of case study of this, like this land of like 1.4 billion people, and just this. I know it's kind of next door to Sri Lanka and kind of dwarfs Sri Lanka by a lot, although there is some connection to southern India and Sri Lanka. But you look at this, and there's entire like subsections of society that are just mired in poverty, and education is the only way out. And so no wonder they place such high emphasis. Whereas over here, because it's so like readily available, we kind of just like take it for granted. And even without like a great education, we still have a pretty high standard of living. So with kind of that backstory, did your parents really place an emphasis or value on higher education?
Absolutely. I was actually the first person ever in my lineage of, I guess, human beings to graduate with a university degree in a Western country. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure on me growing up to do well in my studies, but not as much as other Sri Lankan families. I got lucky a bit,
Yeah, yeah.
where my mom was more, but the other side of the coin was that's also something I really wanted. Like when I was
Right.
12
Okay.
years old, a lot of people write, they want to be an astronaut, they want to be like some stand-up comedian, and
Yeah.
I wrote in my yearbook that I wanted to be an accountant.
Wow.
Not because my parents wanted me to be one, but it's because I looked at my report card. I was good at math and I was shit at everything else. So I was like, yeah.
You're like, yeah. Well, it makes sense that you're good at math, and that, because math and linguistics, from a brain perspective, have a lot of crossover. Do you happen to have any untapped musical ability?
I played guitar for 5 years, but I'm
Okay.
not. There's not much. Let's just say there's not much left to tap. Let's put it that way. I think I've tapped out.
Hey, fixed mindset versus growth mindset here. Yeah.
Maybe I'll play the piano. I'm just so busy
Yeah,
with.
yeah. Well, I mean, but you also, I think, are an advocate for people who want to get more, because I think we might look at this and go, well, hey, public speaking skills are only relevant for someone in this setting. But I think learning to be a better communicator has value in our relationships. I recently wrote a post, and one of the things that I touched on is how my wife and I communicate now versus how we used to communicate, and it's so much more human and compassionate and understanding. But it was a skill that I really had to learn, and maybe we had to learn. My wife used to call me the Tin Man. I was very disconnected from my emotions, or I really suppressed them and hid them. And so that my communication was a way of kind of sheltering that and hiding that and masking it. Whereas now it's much more open and authentic and emotive. So I share that because I think there's real value in learning this that goes outside of just maybe being a professional speaker or a professional presenter in some capacity. That there's a lot of spillover value to many areas of life. Do you find that to be the case?
Mm, do I find that to be the case? I definitely think there's overlap. Definitely think there's overlap in the way that we communicate ideas in every area of life that we take on. And the question I always ask people to think about, Jonathan, is how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? Because when we
Mm-hmm.
start to answer that question, to your point, we'll come up with different reasons. Some of us want to be a better communicator to grow the podcast. Some of us want to
Right.
be to grow our coaching business but other people it's to your point, better relationship with my wife, better relationship with my husband, my kids, people are around me. But the real key here is you're right. Communication is so much more than speaking on a stage. It's
Mm.
every interaction you'll have with every human being for the rest of your life. So when you realize that communication is about leading a fulfilling life, not just increasing the pocketbooks, that's when you start to take it more seriously.
I love that. I just want to I want to bask in that for a minute, just about communication being like the link to a more fulfilling life. Because we think about it. I mean, again, I go back to my experience having been a traveler and then going to other countries where I don't speak the language, and just one of the worst experiences, not worst experiences, but one of the most difficult things to feel is to look at somebody from another culture, and the both of you have the same feeling. I want to share something with you. I want to connect with you on a human level, but we speak two totally different languages. That there's there, and we're trying to use gestures and facial expressions and so on, and there's just this gap there that you seemingly can't bridge. And I wonder if sometimes that's maybe what people feel like, even when it comes to communicate in your own language to another person, especially if there's an emotional investment in that communication, where it's like there's this thing that I want to say, but I can't seem to say it, and I don't know how to say it. And so for me, it's really fascinating just learning, and this is why I do podcasting, for example. I mean, I've been doing live shows since about 2016. It's one of my favorite things to do because I love connecting with other human beings and just exploring their stories and how they become like who they are and do what they do. What gives you, because do you coach people? Do you work with people like in a one-on-one capacity or group capacity? Do you have courses? Like, what does it look like when you besides giving people amazing free material on your YouTube channel, which I believe is called MasterTalk or Master Talks with an S. Is it? Yeah.
No, you're all good, Jonathan. So the origin story behind MasterTalk was after I started doing the case competitions, and I started getting better. Think of me like the Michael Jordan that nobody gives a shit about. That's kind of who I was,
yeah.
Right?
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, because I was like, because it's interesting because in Montreal at Concordia University, that's where I studied.
Yeah.
I'm just mentioning because you probably might know it because you're Canadian.
Mm-mm.
When I studied there, think of it like the suburb version of McGill University.
Right, that's exactly. My grand went to McGill, so
there you go. Yeah,
yeah,
typical. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm just joking. So people have no idea what we're talking about. But anyways, the point is Concordia, oddly enough, has the world's largest case competition program. Who knew?
Wow, who knew?
Who
Yeah,
knew?
no kidding.
I didn't know that. So
Right.
there was like 79 students in this program. So after I started winning case competitions a lot across Canada, like at Ryerson University, I'd go to all these places and we would just dominate people. I started becoming more of an advisor rather than a competitor, kind of like the basketball player who becomes a basketball coach.
Right.
And the reason I took on that coach role is because I just got really obsessed with these things. The same way MJ was crazy about basketball, like Michael Jordan. I was, but it's just people care about basketball. I was doing it in presentation. So I pretty much started coaching all of those students for free. I was just like, go and win. And then that led to the idea for MasterTalk because I accidentally developed a skill on how to coach people. And that's when I started making videos.
Well, here's where things get, because obviously I'm a coach as well in a different realm, but like here's where things get really fascinating because the more you teach something, the more you become self-aware. You yourself grow so much. And I joke that like part of the reason that I coach is because I wanted to get better at myself. We explore that, often we're driven to explore like our own areas of maybe greatest weakness or greatest potential and greatest opportunity. And one of the most amazing ways to really solidify our understanding of something is to try to teach somebody else. And along the way, discover, oh, shoot, there's kind of a gap here. And I think of how many times I've discovered a gap in my coaching practice where I go, oof, it feels like I've hit a wall. I have to learn and grow a little bit more because a client presented me with something I hadn't seen before. And I wonder if, you sometimes encounter that or have, maybe by now you're just, very, very experienced in doing this. But in terms of trying to teach other people about this, you go, oh, here's something I hadn't thought about. And there's probably all these really like fine details that the average person would have absolutely no clue about. And so maybe what I'm doing is I'm opening the door to you sharing some of the finer details of public speaking that the average person would never even think about, but could really dramatically shift how we communicate.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Great thoughts there. So a couple of things. The first one that you got me excited about is something a Coach Harlan told me, another guy that I know. He said, when you imagine a red car, so let's say I told you to imagine a red car. The red car that's in your mind right now is a very different picture than my red car. Because yours might be like a Tesla, it might be a Ferrari, and for me it might be a Lamborghini. So
it was a Ferrari.
It was a Ferrari, fair enough. so when we share a message, just because we think it's the same idea doesn't mean it's heard in the same way by everyone who's listening. So we always want to be specific with the way that we communicate ideas, how we share things. So coaching is a similar thing. Is all of the experience I've accumulated had very little to do with theory, had almost everything to do with practice. So I have an accounting degree of all things. Right. So I was coaching all of these kids like probably 7 years ago. And I was like, does this work? I'm like a chef. Does this work? And they're like, ew, too salty. And they're like the next thing. And then I just kept throwing a bunch of stuff. And then I started developing my own stuff to figure out what worked and what didn't. And then it led to executives and stuff. But the main idea here is the biggest thing with communication that people miss is that by far easy wins lead to big momentum. So what I mean by that is I'll give you a super easy exercise. Let's say we take the random word exercise. Pick a random word like phone.
Broom.
Broom, right? Pistachio, it doesn't really matter. You create presentations out of thin air. So this sounds really stupid, but if you do this like 100 times, you actually realize that you get really good at communication really rapidly. And it's that type of momentum that gives you the confidence to keep
right. So this is very similar to improv. My wife is a theater performer, and among other things, she performs in improv and improv comedy, which is improvisational theater. So where the audience they'll be like, tell us an occupation, tell us a color, and give us a number. And they'll just throw these things out, and all of a sudden they have to create a show based on this. It's again, I go back because clearly I love the brain and how it works. That's my jam.
Yeah,
And I
you're
think
big. You should have became like a neurosurgeon or something.
well, it's very interesting because I look at how my coaching has changed. From the beginning, I was a very variables-based coach, macronutrients and meal timing and training variables and things like that. Until I realized there's a human component to this that is missing, and I got really into the brain and behavioral development and how the brain actually works and functions to as a lens to understand our behavior. And so it's been like this huge shift. But and then pardon me, my train of thoughts went right off the track because I started thinking about neuroplasticity and how amazing it is. So practicing these random word drills again is such a healthy brain exercise. So let's just say someone's worried about age-based brain degeneration, which they probably aren't listening to this podcast. But you think about like Alzheimer's, dementia, these sorts of neurodegenerative conditions, they actually start to develop in your 40s, and people don't realize this. By the time the symptoms show up in like your 60s or 70s, they've been developing for 20 to 25 years. And so doing an exercise like this is exercise for your brain. It helps your brain to be healthier. And the way that I like to think about a brain is a computer that can build circuits. It can grow circuits by itself. And that's our brain. So when you do something like the random word exercise, so maybe maybe we'll demonstrate this. I'm going to pick a random word and throw it at you and see what you can do with it. So I have on my desk a bottle of Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. What is Worcestershire? Could I get a definition?
Worcestershire is a sauce. The key ingredients are anchovy and tamarind, actually, and fermented for 18 months.
All right, let's do it. Life is all about the delicacy, the finer details of life. Whether it comes to our health, whether it comes to the way that we enjoy life, and especially when it comes to our food. When we try pizza and we try different toppings on that pizza, we can put a lot of different ingredients. Peppers, pineapples for those who are icky, and in some cases, anchovies. But what if I told you there was a sauce that could allow you to enjoy the finer details of anchovies without ever having one on your pizza? And I'm talking about the Worcestershire sauce. It's a special kind of sauce with a little bit of anchovies and a little bit of tamarind, and it's fermented for so many months to get you the result that you're looking for. And in the same way that we might use Worcestershire to make our food taste a bit more finer, in the case of our food, probably a little bit more saltier since there's a lot of anchovies in that thing, I want us to think about the Worcestershire of our life. What finer details are missing from creating an extraordinary life? Because if we just keep food the way it is, if we just keep eating the same thing all the time, the same burgers, the same fries, the same pizzas, without adding that little Worcestershire on top, we're not going to make it flagrant and magical. So find the Worcestershire not just in your food, but in every area of life. Because it might be skydiving. It might be finding the love of your life, or maybe it might just be ordering another bottle of Worcestershire.
Like, shall we applaud? So for me, it was very interesting listening to that, not just for what you were able to produce from that, but there's so many elements to what you just did there in terms of your presentation, the leaning in, the stepping back, the pausing, the inflection, the raising your volume, and so on. And you probably don't even think about these details anymore because you just did it like that without thinking about it because it's something you teach. But if you look at that presentation and you compare it to something you might have done, 10 years ago, there's like a vast difference.
Oh yeah, I mean, at this point I've probably done the random word exercise like a few thousand times. But I think the point I want to drive, John, is you could be this person too.
Right. Yeah.
You could be me too. It's not because of Brendan's special. I'm literally coming to you live from my mother's basement. I'm not like some right. If you do it every day, like
right.
It just takes a minute. You do it every day, a few times a day. You'll have done the exercise as many times as I have. And that's really the magic.
Right. Now, if someone's going to do that, is there any kind of structure they should think about? Because you took people on a bit of a journey. There's a bit of a story, arc to yours. And there's some details you really drew in, and it was very inspirational and motivational. There's some really beautiful elements that you drew into it. But so someone might listen to that and go like, oh gosh, do I have to be that aspirational?
Not at all. Great question. That's actually the most common question I get asked from clients when I teach them the random word exercise. What's the formula? And my response is always this: you do not get paid based on how well you do the exercise. You get paid on how many times you do it. So until you've done it 100 times, I don't even want you to think about structure. So, and that's the thing, Jonathan. 95% of people who listen to that go like, that's cool. I'm not going to do it. And there's going to be a 5% of people, 2%, 3% who are going to do it. Those people are going to find their own structure.
Yeah. That's it. Well, this has been a lot of fun, man. And I'm just looking at the ticking clock here, and it's been a fascinating conversation. We went from the life of immigrant parents to the
Worcestershire.
Worcestershire.
I learned something new today. I didn't even know what that was. I was like, Wisconsin, Windsor.
Well, most people get confused by how to even pronounce it, right? Because it looks like Worcestershire sauce, but the way that the Brits would actually pronounce it is like Worcestershire, like Worcester. Kind of thing. And
it looked like the whiskey to me. I looked at it, I was like, this is whiskey?
Yeah, like I've got a bottle of whiskey, I'm, beside my desk, just doing shots of it before I go live and do podcasts. This isn't the Joe Rogan experience. It could be, I guess.
It's like the Canadian version.
Right. I think it's going to evolve into that, because I just love having these fascinating conversations. That's why I have 3 podcasts, and each one is a slightly different area of life. It's not so black and white. Next week, I'm just putting a plug in there anyways, but next week I'm interviewing someone who's interviewed extremists like ISIS terrorists and white supremacists and so on in the study of combating violent extremism, which is going to be incredibly fascinating. And then we have someone who fights against child sex trafficking. And so we're having conversations, heavy, conversations on these really, really big topics. But it's what I love to do, which is why I was so excited when you came on, because I have not interviewed a professional speaker from Montreal ever before in my life. And now my life feels just a little bit more complete.
It's very humbling that you put me on the same level as the guy who's intriguing extremists and or gal or who's helping kids from sex trafficking. Jeez, I'm honored to be on the same.
So I'm giving you something aspirational to work towards, because you gave such a moving presentation on Worcestershire sauce. So just to close out, if people want to know more about you, where do they find you? How do they connect with you? And maybe what do you offer people? Because maybe someone listening that goes, man, I need to connect with this guy. I want to be a better speaker.
Absolutely, brother. A great conversation. Thanks for having me. So 2 easy ways. Number 1 is the YouTube channel. Just type MasterTalk in one word, and you'll have access to my hundreds of free videos on how to speak. And then the second way to keep in touch is, for those of you who are interested in coaching, sign up for one of my free trainings on effective communication over Zoom. All you have to do is go to rockstarcommunicator.com.
That's it. So easy. We'll make sure the links are in the show notes again. Any final words of wisdom, just to close things out before I click play on the outro video? Last words of wisdom. No pressure at all.
Sounds good. Last words of wisdom would be this: you heard the question, but you didn't reflect on it. And I'm not talking to you, John. I'm talking to the audience. And the question was, how would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? Don't leave that question in the realm of your notes. Take that question out of your notes and put it on a brand new sheet of paper and start reflecting on it. Because if you don't have the motivation, if you can't find the reason to be a great speaker, you'll never become one. So spend the time to dream about your communication the same way you dream about the vacation you want to go on next week. And that is the first step to master your communication skills.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.